Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our free webinar session presented by InsightWorks. Today's topic is going to be automating your production scheduling in Business Central with MX APS. We estimate that today's webinar will take about 1 hour of your time, including some time at the end for Q&A. The webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand after the live session. So all attendees will receive a follow-up email after the webinar is complete with a link to access the presentation. With that being said, I'd like everyone to submit their questions through the question panel during the session or wait until the end for the Q&A. And please remember to stay muted during this session. Now I'd like to introduce you all to Mark Hamblin, Senior Solution Advisor at InsightWorks.
Hey, good morning or afternoon, everyone. This is Mark here, and thanks for the intro there, Robbie. And as mentioned, what we're going to talk about today is production scheduling within Business Central and how to automate that and the various options you have available for doing that scheduling. And we're going to focus on a product called MX APS. So that's MX is manufacturing excellence, APS is advanced planning and scheduling. I like to use the term automated production scheduling because that's really what you're going to get out of it. At any rate, let's jump in and get started. So the first thing, just a little bit about, us as an InsightWorks, the manufacturers or the developers of the MX APS product. We work globally with tons of manufacturers and tons of partners, and Sabre is one of our key partners, or probably our key partner within Canada for the manufacturing side of things. We've been around for about 10 years now. We've got a ton of applications out there. A lot of people know us for our warehouse management, but on the manufacturing side of things, we schedule some very, very large facilities, billions of dollars worth of parts going through these facilities. And we also schedule some very small facilities, maybe running 10 or 20 production orders a week. We've got that breadth of capability across all of those organizations. We do more than just scheduling. We do, shop floor data collection, quality inspections, all sorts of things. We've got over 13 applications for Business Central to help you with your manufacturing requirements. Okay, this chunk of stuff over here on the left here, those are all the applications we have available, and a subset of those are completely free. So that subset, there's a few in here that are probably worth discussing for you. This top is more sort of, we call them the power tools, are more for sort of the implementers or the power users to do things. The ones at the bottom here are some of the key free apps. We have over 30, but these are some of the key ones that may be of interest to this audience. The first one being the graphical scheduler. So we'll show that today in the demo. What that allows you to do is drag and drop production orders, jobs, pick tickets, whatever you want. You can schedule almost anything you like or display the schedule of almost anything you like on the graphical scheduler and use that to visualize those things. The default, of course, is production orders. So if you go in there, you'll see your production orders. You can drag and drop them, everything else. But you could throw jobs or whatever else you want on that graphical scheduler. And again, that's completely free. You can install that and go to town if you're running in Business Central Cloud, or talk to your account manager at Sabre. They'll help you, sort of get moving with that. Doc Extender is drag and drop functionality within Business Central. You might be thinking, well, Business Central's got drag and drop documents. It kind of does. It's a bit of a pain to use. This simplifies it. And one of the key things here is it allows you to store those documents in SharePoint when you drop them into Business Central. And that gives you really a full-featured document management system driven from within Business Central. So I drop a document in there, I can do revision control, I can do alerting, I can link that out to the shop floor now because it's stored in the cloud and SharePoint, all sorts of good things like that using that doc extender. Ordership Express and WMS Express. If you're in manufacturing, you're producing inventory, and sooner or later, you got to get that out the door. And these two applications allow you to do that. So Ordership Express, it's a free application to generate shipping labels directly within Business Central. So you don't have to go to your carrier software or to a website or anything like that. If it's domestic parcel, you can do everything from within Business Central. Now we have a higher end tool called Dynamic Ship that can do LTL and international and everything you could ever want in a shipping solution. But for this, if you're doing domestic parcel, this allows you to go out, get your shipping labels, get the tracking numbers, get the costs, everything right within Business Central. It takes like 10 minutes to set up and 30 seconds to generate, go in and enter the information you need to generate labels. So really worthwhile. And WMS Express is barcoding for Business Central. So if you need to perform sort of the key functions in, any sort of manufacturing or warehouse facility, which are receiving, picking or shipping, bin-to-bin movements, if you have bins enabled, and inventory counts, that's what this does. So if you need to enable barcoding within Business Central, you're set up and you're doing everything on paper and you want to add barcodes into the mix, this guy's free. Sabre can help you, investigate it, set it up, get it running, and away you go. Or we have a quick start for this as well, where we can help you get it set up and you're up and running within a day or two. So those two guys there gives you a full, effectively a WMS within Business Central at no cost. This guy here allows you to schedule. If you're a low volume production environment, you can go in there, do all your drag and drop scheduling, visually, and it doesn't cost you a thing. Now, if you want to graduate to something more, we've got a bunch of key applications that we recommend for manufacturing. So I'll run through those here. So the first one, we're going to, not really cover this much today, but we have something called the Enhanced Planning Pack. If you're already running the planning worksheet within Business Central and you need something more robust, or if you need to do forecasting, or if you want to do your production analysis at the end, like look at your variances and look at your actual times versus expected times, all that sort of thing, manage your bills of material a little more comprehensively, this is the tool for you. So the minimum, the Enhanced Planning Worksheet, which is part of this pack, makes it much nicer to do your planning. So to run your MRP, to do your purchase planning, everything else, you can use the Enhanced Planning Worksheet that replaces the existing planning worksheet within Business Central and just works way better. Will save your planner probably hours a day of time and poking around that makes your life a lot easier. At any rate, we use this tool or the built-in planning worksheet in Business Central to do the planning. Once you've got your production orders planned, like they're firm planned, everything else, we've got a rough due date based on your demand date, like the sales order or forecast or whatever. We then send that out to the scheduling system. And there's two there. The one I mentioned already, the graphical scheduler. So if you're lower volume and you're okay with dragging and dropping stuff to, move things around, great, use that. But ideally, we don't want anybody to ever have to do that ever again manually, right? If you've got 500 production orders on there and you're sitting, for half the day dragging and dropping things around, that's a bad thing. We don't like that, and you shouldn't like it either. What you want to do is you want to use MX APS. And MX APS lets you hit a button and gives you a schedule that you can actually execute on the shop floor. And what that means is we're looking at, your capacities that are available, your machine capabilities, your labor, if you like, your material, your tooling, any of those constraints that have an impact on how you're able to execute on the shop floor, you can put into MX APS. It'll investigate all of that and give you a schedule that you can actually run out in the shop floor. And it's effectively one click and no more drag and drop ever, hopefully. You may not even want to look at the schedule. You just run that thing and out it goes to the shop floor. Now, once it goes to the shop floor, we've got the shop floor insight. All of these, incidentally, are all optional. They're individual apps. They, of course, all work together if you like, but you don't need them all. But if you're doing this sort of detailed level of scheduling, you're going to want to know what happened on the shop floor after you push that schedule out there. And Shop Floor Insight helps you present the schedule to the shop floor, and it also allows you to capture what happened in the shop, and that, of course, feeds back into your scheduling. So what you've produced, the labor time, all of that kind of stuff, and that will impact the next time you run the schedule. So Shop Floor Insight is a great tool for capturing the labor, output, consumption, quality, all of those things that you need to capture out there on the shop floor. Now, once we've done all this stuff, we've planned it, we've executed it, we've planned it, scheduled it, executed it. We're now done the production. We need to get it out the door, and that's where it goes out to a couple of other tools. Order fulfillment worksheet. If you're a higher volume organization, you do manufacturing, maybe you do distribution, this guy's great because what it does is it helps you plan what you're going to ship today. In fact, it tells you what you can ship today. So if you ever ask the question, what do I need to get out the door today, or what can I get out the door today? Order fulfillment worksheet is going to do that for you. It's going to automate that decision-making process for you, automate all the manual steps required to generate the pick tickets and everything else you need to get stuff out the door. And again, it's optional. You don't have to use that. And then you can send it out to either the Warehouse Insight or the WMS Express I mentioned earlier. So Warehouse Insight is the big brother guy. it will do, it's a full WMS. It can also do consumption and output if you prefer to use that over shop floor. We can do a whole bunch of stuff there. It allows you to, of course, scan barcodes, to put product away, to pick it for shipping, all of those sorts of things. And then finally, we send it out to shipping, where I mentioned Order Ship Express. If it's domestic parcel, you can bring your own carriers like Purolator, Canada Post, UPS, FedEx, DHL, whatever you want. 3 carriers in Order Ship Express. Dynamic ship, you can have unlimited number of carriers. We can ship parcel, LTL, international, domestic, whatever you want. And that will generate bills of lading, labels, can do rate shopping, all that kind of stuff, and it gets it out the door. So when we're talking about manufacturing, we're not just talking about scheduling or the execution side. We really got an end-to-end solution for those manufacturing environments. Everything from, your planning, including forecasting, so your demand planning, out to detailed scheduling, capacity planning, to execution, to fulfillment, to get things out the door. Now, what we're going to focus on today is, sort of the MX APS and a little bit of graphical scheduling. So what is MX APS? Well, really, that first line kind of says it all. Well, the first part of the first line, finite capacity forward scheduling engine. So what that means is, unlike Business Central, where it takes the due date from the sales order, and maybe a sales guy, Friday afternoon left the ship date is Friday afternoon because that's what it defaulted into. Business Central will backwards schedule from that date and tell you when you need to start. Well, I don't want to know I needed to start 2 weeks ago to get it shipped out tomorrow. I want to know, hey, if I start tomorrow, when can I actually ship this thing out? So that's the difference between forward scheduling and backward scheduling. Forward scheduling starts from a set date, like tomorrow, and tells me when this thing is going to be ready to go out the door. Okay. And it respects the capacity. So Business Central doesn't, and we'll look at that in a sec. You can say, oh, I've got this piece of equipment can run 8 hours a day, but I could put 500 hours a day of load on that machine, and Business Central won't blink. It'll say, yeah, figure it out. Well, MX will figure it out for you. Okay. And the other nice thing is it's got automatic machine center selection. So what that means is, if I've got, let's say it's injection molding or something like that, I've got one work center with, 5 or 10 equivalent machines within that work center. I don't have to tell the system which machine to use. MX will pick the right machine for that particular job. You can set up preferred machines, alternate machines, all sorts of things like that. So it makes an intelligent choice about how to schedule that production. Okay, whole bunch of other stuff for setup production. So we can, do partial setup reduction. Maybe if it's just a color change, it's a partial reduction. If it's a tooling change, we can eliminate the entire tooling changeover, all that kind of stuff through setup. I already mentioned labor, tooling, material, all sorts of constraints you can put in it. Anything that's going to impact how you're able to execute on your production, you can, configure into MX. It'll take that into account, and again, give you a schedule you can actually execute when it pops out of the system. Okay, whole bunch of other stuff here. Lot splitting is another one. If you're sort of a high volume manufacturer, if I've got an order for, 10,000 pieces, that might take me a week to run. Well, I could split that up into, runs of 500 a piece, and maybe schedule that across multiple machines and all that without messing with my production order. My production order will still be for 10,000 or whatever, but MX will split it up and spread that load across multiple machines or multiple days or whatever you set it up for. Okay, so lots of goodies there. And again, the key one is it's an automatic finite capacity scheduler. Right? And this just-in-time scheduling, JIT, if you do need backward scheduling, it can kind of do that. You can do just-in-time scheduling. So if you're in foods or something like that, where you don't want to finish your production too soon, you want to finish it as close to the customer's requirement date as possible, we can do that as well. Okay. All right. Now with that, way too much blabbing. Let's actually see what this thing looks like. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually not going to demo MX APS. I'm going to jump here into Business Central, and I'm going to talk about the graphical scheduler. And in this particular company here, I've got the graphical scheduler in here as a bookmark. And when I open it up, the default that you get when you install it is, well, actually not quite this, but very similar. You get all your production orders shown. Right, so these are all my production orders in the system. I've actually come in here and customized the view a little. Like I've changed colors. I've said, hey, if an order is late, turn it, red and gray. So we have the concept of an order being late or not. So this one's late, and if I click on it, of course, it highlights all the operations and everything else, and I can hit details to drill into the production order and all those sorts of things. And of course, this allows me to drag and drop. If I want to move these things around, I can. So that gives us our visualization of all the production orders, and I can drag and drop. Another thing I did was I put the loading up here, right? So it's not just production orders you can put on this. You can plot whatever you like on this chart. So I can put loading, I can put purchase order receipts in here. I can plot whatever I want. I can change the colors to whatever I want. I can put whatever text I like in there. It's an extremely configurable solution. So if I go into the view, this is my default view. Again, I can come in here. The way I've got it set up, I've just got, my production orders that are just the release production orders. I can put in what text I want to show up in there. I can decide how tall I want the things are. Here's my loading, right, that I added in. Here's the colors that I can set, all of those sorts of things. So very flexible, very configurable. You can make this thing look and feel however you want. And again, I can come in here and add in pretty much anything in Business Central to show on this chart, or create a new view for something completely different. If I want to see service orders on a chart, as an example, I can create a new view, or I can put my service orders right on this chart as well. Okay, so anyway, lots of goodies you can do there. That's the standard free graphical scheduler. You can install this from AppSource today, plug it in, and go to town. Drag and drop, customize it, do whatever the heck you want. It's got all sorts of options for zooming. You can even see calendar views, things like that. Very, capable drag and drop solution, completely free. But again, I don't want to sit in here. If I've got, 5 production orders, great. Yeah, I can come in here and I can move this around, say I want to run this over here instead of up here, or whatever I want to do. I can do all that dragging and dropping and, mess with it here. But if I've got, 1,000 or 100 production orders, I don't want to sit there all day moving things around. What I want to do is have the system automatically tell me how I can, run that schedule in the shop. And so for that, I'm going to switch to a different company here. And what we're going to do is first we're going to look at kind of what we're scheduling. Okay, so the first thing that I'll do is I'll go into this product design here, and we're going to look at some items as soon as it loads up here. So what we're scheduling today is going to be battery boxes. And if I come in here and we look at the structure for this item that we're scheduling, I've got, sort of multi-level bill here. I've got a bunch of stuff, and it's also telling me where everything has to be, done on, right? So battery box, a lot of metal stuff. So we're going to do, shear, we're going to do this finishing mill, all this. And you'll notice everything here is scheduled at a work center. Well, I might have 2 finishing mills in there, or I might have, a whole bunch of different laser cutters or whatever else. We're not saying run it on a specific machine. We're saying, pick a machine within the list of the machines available in this work center. Now, one exception is this one here. Because this is a long bracket that this particular, product uses, we say you need to use this 10-foot press brake, right? So that's what we're going to schedule that work on, is this specific machine. Okay, so I'll get into that. But everything else, you just say, hey, I want to schedule it on any machine that's available within this work center, and it's going to pick the best one to use. Okay, so that's what we're scheduling, or that's the product that I have in the system. Now, as far as demand goes, what I've got is I've got a forecast in there. I generated a forecast, and I generated a bunch of production orders to schedule based on that forecast. And the problem with that is when we do that forecast, it's a monthly forecast. So you'll notice the dates here will all kind of way in the past, but that's okay. The dates here are all roughly on the same due date, right? So all of this stuff is supposed to be done effectively the same day, or very close to everything on the same day. And that's pretty common, especially if you're doing a forecast, because it's going to choose the end of the month to make these things to set the demand date for at the end of the month. But again, if you've got salespeople entering sales orders, quite often they're going to use a dummy date or just a random date in the future. And you're going to get things like this where, there's no way I can do the production for all of these things on the same day potentially, right? That's a lot of product I need to produce on the same day. 250 brackets, across multiple production orders, all due the same day. Well, that's not likely realistic. Okay. So what happens is when Business Central takes that forecast or the sales order demand or whatever, and does its scheduling in air quotes to plan when you do it, what you end up with, I'm just going to open up the graphical scheduler, is something that you can't actually execute on the shop floor. So what you see is here, like on this laser cutter here, I've got everything scheduled Friday afternoon, right? Because the demand date was all for Friday. So this is telling me, and same thing here on the press break, everything is scheduled here on this Friday afternoon. Well, this is a pretty poor schedule if I'm looking out the next few days. I couldn't execute this. And not only that, because our routing said, hey, do all the work on this laser cutter work center, it's dumped it all onto this work center, and it hasn't told us which machine we should be using to do this work. Now I could come in here and drag and drop it and spend my day selecting which machine I'm going to run all this work on, and that's what people are doing today. They're manually moving things around to figure out how they're going to run this, right? And by the way, this is zoomed in to sort of the day of the week. If we wanted to see more detail, we could go in sort of at the hourly level and see more detail about all these. But I don't want to sit there dragging and dropping all this stuff around. I want to have the system do this for me automatically. So that's what we're going to look at next. So the next thing is, instead of me sitting here for a couple hours dragging and dropping these things around, I'm going to run the automated schedule. And here again, by the way, I added this loading up at the top, and I set some color rules and things like that to show the loading on the individual work centers and machine centers. Just as a quick aside, there's tons of stuff you can do. Like here's an example where this is my load management screen where I'm not actually showing the individual production orders. I'm just showing the load at the work center level, right? So anyway, tons of stuff you can do with that graphical scheduler. And again, that graphical scheduler is completely free and you can do all sorts of things with it. Now, back to the problem at hand, the scheduling. So how do I get a better schedule out of that system? Well, you simply come in here and say, generate production schedule. I'm not going to talk too much about cells, but we're going to handle cellular manufacturing. So you've got a machine shop and an assembly area or a baking area and a packaging area. We can schedule those differently with different rules. In this case, I'm just going to schedule everything the same. And I'm going to say, you know what, starting tomorrow at 8 a.m., tell me what the next 30 days looks like in my shop. And you can go out to 600 days or whatever you want, whatever, sort of time frame you want to look at, duration you want to look at, you can set. Typically, it's going to be 30 days, right? Unless your production orders are, take a couple months to do, you're going to schedule out a certain amount of time and away you go. And there's a few other options you can set here. I'm not going to bother. I'm just going to, for this one, schedule all my firm planned orders, but you can come in and set filters on firm planned, release, whatever the heck you want to do, and away you go. And this global lead time here, by the way, if you've got material constraints in there, like you're looking at, hey, can I run this production order if I don't have material? If I set a global lead time in here, it'll say, okay, you don't have material, but if I've got a 5-day lead time, after 5 days, it'll allow that production order to schedule because you're saying I can get material within 5 days. If you don't set this, it's just going to use the lead time on the item itself. And it's also going to look at incoming purchase orders and things like that as well. Anyway, a bunch of stuff you can set. Normally, all you do is you set the date, like, hey, starting tomorrow at 8 a.m., what's my schedule look like? And you hit generate schedule. Now, this scheduling time can vary quite a bit. I've got just under 70 orders, I think, in here. So it takes me about 20 seconds to generate. Well, I've got 61 orders. It takes me 20 seconds to generate that schedule. If you've got a high number of operations and constraints and things like that, it could take several minutes, right? And potentially longer for very large data sets. But typically, it's anywhere from 30 seconds to a couple of minutes to run that schedule. So way faster than MRP and everything else in Business Central. Very quick and easy. And what it does is it says, okay, you schedule those. Well, 61 of those are going to be late. And that's because all my dates are in the past, right? So I can come in here and I can do what if scenarios. I can say, hey, yeah, these are all late. I'm going to add another shift, or I'm going to, go and set the due dates properly on my sales orders or whatever, or I'm going to outsource more. And I can run as many scenarios as I like. So here's another scenario where I've only got 31 late orders. I've got a bunch of early orders. I've got some on-time orders. So you can play with that. You can add work centers. You can add overtime. You can add shifts. You can do all sorts of things to sort of evaluate how good that schedule is going to be, right? Now, This is just a quick overview. If I actually want to see what the schedule looks like, I can actually open it up if I want. Most of the time, you wouldn't have to go into this, but this is really your dispatch list by work center, right? So we can see we've got some welding stuff, and I can, publish this out to the shop floor, either using shop floor insight or a screen or a piece of paper. I can say, hey, for the finishing mill, here's my schedule for the finishing mill, right? I can come in and filter down to that, and here's my schedule for the finishing mill. But most of the time, you're not going to look at it like this. What you're going to do is you're going to look at it visually. Actually, ideally, you will never look at it. What you'll do is you'll have that schedule run behind the scenes, in the job queue or whatever, and it's just going to generate the schedule and publish it without any human interaction whatsoever. But if you do want to look at it, especially when you first start and you want to make sure the schedule is good, you'll open up this that view. This is just the graphical scheduler again, but now it's showing me all the MX APS schedule results. And what we see here, this purple is the setup time and the green is the runtime. Okay. And so we can see when it's eliminated setup time. So what it'll do again is it'll pull in similar products from the future back into the past so that we can eliminate that setup. So there's rules you can set up there and say, hey, if there's the same product or similar product that's running, within the next 2 weeks or whatever, group those together so we can eliminate that changeover, that sort of thing. We can do all that. And of course, you can come in here and, see all the different production orders and how they're going to run and everything else. And you'll notice on here, when I showed the standard Business Central schedule, everything was grouped on Friday afternoon on the work center. MX has taken all of that work, it's chosen an appropriate laser cutter to put it on, and it's not overloading my capacity. It's respecting the capacity I've defined and only scheduling, when I have availability on that equipment. Okay, and you'll notice here I've got these short brackets, this short here, and I've got these long brackets. And again, the long brackets are supposed to run on this 10-foot press brake, but at some point, that 10-foot press brake gets overloaded. There's too much work on it. So the schedule has to decide, do I wait and make this order even later than it is, or can I choose an alternate machine to run it on? And that's what it did here. It chose this 120 ton that costs more to run or it takes longer to run or whatever. But the system decided to use that because overall, it's a better choice. It results in a better schedule than waiting for the preferred machine to be done. Okay, so it can make those intelligent decisions. Like it can decide, hey, I'm going to subcontract this and set a schedule in internally because even though subcontracting is a 1-week turnaround, it's still going to be faster than if I have to wait for one of the internal machines to be available. Okay, so you can make all those intelligent decisions about which machine to use, alternate machines, all of those sorts of things as well. Okay, now if we go down to my welding area here, we see a couple of little things. Oh, and here, actually, before I do that, I'll do the powder coat line. This is what subcontracting might look like. So if you want to schedule subcontracting, we can as well. We don't actually schedule it because all we're saying is, hey, we're going to send something out to the subcontractor. It's going to be a few days and it's going to come back in. And we will overload that capacity. So this powder coat line here, you can see we've got multiple production orders scheduled at the same time. Well, you can do that. Obviously, there are times when you will have multiple production orders scheduled at the same time on a work center, and we can set that up. And here we're not looking at we're not restricting the capacity to a single production order on this machine at the same time. And there's a ton of value in that beyond just sort of, these work centers that can be batched. This can be used. We can turn off, like if we decide, hey, yeah, this press brake here might be a bottleneck. The system will tell us what our bottleneck resources are, right? It'll look at, sort of high queue time, high utilization. Hey, that's a bottleneck. And then I can say, what if this wasn't a bottleneck? I can say, make this infinite capacity, and it'll show me what the ideal schedule would look like if I didn't have a capacity constraint on this machine center. And I can say, oh, look, there's a few times here where if I had an extra, 10-foot, things would be great. Maybe I'll just subcontract that out, or maybe I'll run a second shift on those 2 days or whatever it happens to be to get that product through the door. So it's a great analysis tool for finding bottlenecks and sort of figuring out what you need to do to address those bottlenecks. Okay? Anyway, That's the infinite capacity capability, either for subcontracting, batched work centers, or doing bottleneck analysis and things like that. Down here on the welding, what we've got is a couple of things. So first of all, you see this AL. AL is aluminum. So I've got a couple of different material types that I'm putting through this. And what I've done is I'm sequencing by material type. So I'm doing my aluminum, aluminum, and then I jump over to stainless steel, stainless steel, stainless steel. So what that means is on any attribute we set up in the system, we can sequence by that attribute. So typically it's color or heat or allergen, non-allergen, depends what industry you're in. So, foods or heat treating or whatever, like heat treating, I might want to go from, low temperature to high temperature and then back down to low and sort of do that cycle up and down for heat treating. For colors, if I'm dealing with colors, I'll want to go light to dark and then back down to light. And when I go from dark to light, I'm going to include, some additional time for flushing the system or whatever I need to do. The system can do all of that. Okay, so it can do all of that sequencing as well. Now down here is another interesting thing. I've got 2 welding booths. So I've got, tons of equipment, space available and everything to run 2 production orders simultaneously. And that's what I'm doing until I hit 4 o'clock. At 4 o'clock, I have the space in the facility. I don't have the labor, right? So all of a sudden, my shift changes, and now I only have 1 welder on shift for the night shift. And now I'm only doing 1 production order at a time. Okay, and I've got it set up so it toggles between the 2 work centers so that material gets dropped off at welding booth 1 while I'm working at welding booth 2. Then I do that and so on and so forth. But basically, what that's done is it's looked at my labor availability and made a decision to not schedule. Well, it's not made a decision. It's not allowed to schedule those production orders because they don't have people to execute them. And that's what I mean by those constraints when I talk about labor, material, tooling. If this particular operation needed some tooling that was already in use for some other production order, it wouldn't schedule that for me at this point. In fact, probably what you'd want to do, if it's similar tooling, you may want to group those 2 production orders together so that there's no changeover time for that. But we can constrain by tooling, by labor, and material. So this is exactly what it would look like as well, is if I didn't have material to run this particular operation, it would schedule that out to a point where I do have the material available for that operation. Okay, so again, very simple. You throw it in there, you run the schedule, and it tells you what you're going to accomplish in the shop. You send it out to the shop, people work to this schedule, and ideally nothing else, and you're going to be much more efficient in your shop. So what ends up happening if you don't do something like this, if you just use the built-in, sort of Business Central capability, and you just use it sort of as a sequence, right? Where you go in and say, yeah, schedule everything Friday afternoon, but I'm going to print all that stuff out, put it in a stack top to bottom, and just going to grab the top one off and start working. You see that all the time. What ends up happening is if they don't have a formal schedule to follow, they'll do some local optimization of their own. So they'll say, oh yeah, I grabbed this piece of paper, but the other guy didn't have his, stuff done, like he didn't have the bushings done or whatever. So I'm just going to grab something else and work on that. And what ends up happening is things get out of sync and you end up building a ton of WIP. You've got all these pallets of, WIP sitting around and nobody knows what's going on because they didn't follow an end-to-end schedule that knows exactly what has to happen and in what sequence to do it. Okay, so this has tons of benefits if you execute to a schedule like this. All right, now that all looks, well, hopefully it all looks fancy. And again, very simple, right? All I did, went in, hit a button, hit OK, and away we go. Now to get it working like that, you might think, well, that's probably really hard to do. It's actually not. So first thing is, if I wanted that to be done automatically, I can create a job queue and have it scheduled out automatically. So maybe at 7 a.m. and again at 2 p.m. or shift changes or once a day, I can have it automatically generate the schedule and I'm just good to go. And what it'll do, of course, it'll look at what actually happened in the shop floor since the previous schedule, right? So any output or labor or whatever you've done, it'll take that into account, or there was a machine breakdown, it'll take that type of thing, machine downtime into account, all of those sorts of things, and generate the schedule to work on next. And of course, it takes things into account that are in production. If I've started working on this particular production order on machine A, it's not going to tell me, okay, now you got to run on a machine B. It knows, right? It's smart. Anyway, you can have it run automatically. I've got it set up to show the result list, but there's a whole bunch of things you can do here to, display the schedule after you run it interactively. But all of this information here is done when you install MX APS and you run the setup wizard. So once you install it, run the setup wizard, all the defaults are in there. And if your routings are in good shape, like if they're similar to what I showed you, where I've got routings that identify the work center, and under the work center, there's machine centers. You install MX, you run the setup wizard, you hit generate production schedule, and you will have a schedule. So it could be a 5-minute setup and you're up and running. Now you can do a lot more, of course, than this, right? So you can now start coming in and adding in your constraints and things like that, doing your setup minimization, all sorts of things that you can do to configure the solution. And one thing, while I'm here, I will show you this scheduling rules, because I talked about it earlier. I've just got one sort of default rule that applies to all my production cells. But the idea behind a scheduling rule is it allows you to define, the prioritization of those production orders. So the way it's set up for me is the first thing it looks like is a priority field. So that's something that comes with MX. On the production orders, you can set a priority. So if somebody phones up and says this is a rush order or whatever, on that production order, I can increase the priority of it and it will get scheduled first. If priorities are all equal, it'll look at the due date, and then it'll look at this user 2. Well, what the heck is user 2? So user 2 is one of the custom attributes you can use. And for me, user 2 is a material type. So this is now doing the sequencing for my material type, but it could have been color or whatever I chose. And you can see you can do it by multiple attributes. So if I want to sequence by color, material type, and something else that I can't think of, I can have all of those rules in place and it'll do that for me. Okay. And there's also a ton of built-in things. Like if I want to, look at the customer name first or whatever, or schedule the most overdue orders first, I can do that. Like there's a whole bunch of things you can do here to decide how you schedule it, right? So anyway, you can set all this up, but the default is basically priority, due date, and then a couple of other things here. And that's how it runs the schedule. But you have complete control over all that. And the rule, by the way, is sort of we call it the waveform, but how you kind of do it. So in this case, it's ascending. And what that means is it'll start, sort by, my alphabetical sort, if you will, from A to Z or A to Z on this. But something like the sawtooth, as an example, if I'm doing colors where I want to go light to dark and then drop back down to light again, that's, sort of that ramp up and then straight down. If I'm doing heat treating or baking or something like that, I might want to do a triangle where I start at a low temperature, work my way up to a high temperature, and then back down to a low temperature so that I cover all those production orders off at the different temperatures as I'm going. Okay, so anyway, as far as setup goes, if you're lucky, you run the setup wizard. I shouldn't say lucky, if your routings are in good shape, you run the setup wizard, you hit generate production schedule, and you've got a schedule. If they're not in good shape, we can help you. Actually, Sabre will help you as well to go out, figure out what your routing should look like, and then generate your production schedule from there. So on that note, let's actually have a quick look at what the routings look like. So what I'm going to do is go in here, and I'm going to look at that, that long bracket that we had that dedicated machine center set to. So this is a routing for this specific component. And we're going to do that laser cutting. And of course, it's just scheduled at the laser cutter work center. And within that work center, we've got a couple of different laser cutters. And MX is going to choose the best one to use. But this one here, we said, yeah, you got to run it on this 10-foot machine. And that's what we saw, right? It would try and schedule it on that machine. But if that machine wasn't available, what we've done is we've gone in here and said, if it's not available, there's some alternates you can choose from. And when I say not available, what the system is doing actually is it's not, saying, oh, this isn't available, or because maybe it is available, it's just scheduling it out 3 weeks in advance. What the system actually does is it looks at our preferred machine center and all the alternates we've specified and picks the best match. So if I had 4 alternate machines here that I could run it on, it's going to run basically 5 different scenarios, one for my default and one for each of the alternates. And it's going to compare all those in conjunction with all the other stuff it's scheduling at the same time and make that decision. So it's making hundreds of thousands of decisions, for these production orders, something that no human is ever going to do reliably, right? So it's way better schedule than you're going to get doing anything manually, right? You might want to tweak it, like I didn't show you on the graphical schedule there, but even in the MX APS results, if I don't like the way it's scheduled something, I can drag and drop things around and move it around. But ideally, you're going to use what MX generates and leave it at that. Okay. Now, anyway, in these alternates, I said, we want you to try and use that 10-foot press brake, but also have a look and see if this one is viable or not. But this one takes 1.5 times to set up. So if my setup time was an hour, this is going to be an hour and a half, and it takes twice as long to run that machine, right? But even given that, those penalties, this might be a better machine to use because it results in an overall better schedule, right? Or I can say, you know what? You can also see if subcontracting makes sense. And subcontracting, what this is saying, this nomenclature is saying, that's going to be 48 hours. So basically, 6 work days is what it's going to cost me to send it out to subcontracting. Oh, and by the way, I don't want to send it to subcontracting unless I have at least 1,000 pieces to send to the subcontractor, right? But so that's what this is looking at. So subcontracting might make sense. If I'm going to be delayed more than 6 days using the internal machine and I have 1,000 pieces to do, it's going to say send that out to the subcontractor instead, automatically, without me having to make that decision or figure out does it make sense or not. The system is going to tell me. Okay. All right, so those are the alternates. Now up to here, by the way, up to sort of this unit cost, that's all standard Business Central, right? You'll set up your run times, setup times, everything the way you normally do. Starting from here, this is all MX. And normally there's not much you have to set up. Often this alternate machine is useful. The rest of this, in certain environments it makes sense. Like for example, the just-in-time thing I mentioned and the Max early days, like if I've got food that's going to expire, the customer needs it shipped out, June 20th. I don't want to finish production on it June 1st because I can't ship it for 3 weeks and it's going to go bad before it gets to the customer. So I can say, you know what, I don't want this to be finished. It has to be finished within a few days of the ship date. So you can set that up. You can prevent breaks, right? So, if I've been a heat treating or any type of painting or something like that, where I can't stop in the middle of that operation and go for a break and come back and finish it later, we can prevent that on the schedule as well. Okay. A few other things. The other one that's useful here is that lot splitting I mentioned earlier in the PowerPoint, where you can go in and break up a large order into smaller lots. So I can say, you know what, on this one, it's going to yell at me because I've got a certified routing here, but I could say split it up into 5 lots. So if I had an order for 10,000 pieces, what it'll do is it'll take that production order and it'll break it up into 2,000 piece chunks. The production order stays the same. It's just going to schedule it as if it was 5 different production orders, right? Or the equivalent of 5 different production orders. Or I could say, you know what, I'm going to break it up into, 500. Like if this was maximum lots 1, I'm going to break it up into a lot size of 500 pieces. So now if I had an order for 5,000, I'd get 10 individual lots that would be scheduled. And that's not the same as the lot numbers within Business Central. It may relate to the lot number, but this is really the size of the production order that we're scheduling, or the size of the chunk of the production order we're scheduling. So sometimes that's handy because a lot of people are doing those large production orders. Anyway, a whole bunch of other things you can set. Most of the time, you don't have to mess with any of this stuff at all. There's a few key things that you might want to set up, and you're good to go. And again, you run that, you hit the generate schedule, it takes all this into account, and out pops your schedule. Now, the last thing I'll talk about real quick on the setup is when we're doing constraints, right? Like let's say I don't have material available. How do I indicate that if I don't have a specific component available, you got to wait on that schedule? So if I go in and we're going to look at our items here, and I've got a view that's for my constraints. So constraints are set up as items. So this is a standard component that's on my BOMs, and this is my service constraint, which is labor. Okay, so if we look at this component here first, So it's very simple, right? There's nothing special. It's just a normal, how you manage items and everything else. And down here, like this is a standard item that's on a bill of materials and everything else. But down at the bottom here, under the scheduling, we're saying we're going to constrain based on this item. So if you're familiar with the critical flag on the planning, this guy here, that's sort of similar, but it's specific to MX. And what that's going to do, if I set this to constrain, is if I don't have that inventory available, it's not going to schedule that production order until that inventory is available. And it makes that determination based on the lead time that you've set on the item or SKU, any incoming purchase orders that you have, or the global lead time that's set up for this. Okay, so again, it's not going to schedule that production order until we know we can supply the material for it. If I set this to track, it won't constrain it, but I can get reporting out of the system that says, hey, on June 19th, you're going to be below zero on this inventory, right? And for inventory stuff, MRP is going to pick that up. It's going to know, hey, you're going to be short of this inventory on a certain date because, it looks at the supply demand and everything else. But when we get into labor, that can be very handy. So let's go over to the labor one here. So this is my welding labor. I've got it to constrain as well. And that's what you saw. When I didn't have somebody available for a shift, it didn't schedule those production orders. But if I said track on this, it would have scheduled that production order. But now I can look at my labor requirements and see, hey, on this day and time, I'm going to be short a welder because it's brought my availability of my welding labor down below zero. Okay, so you can do reporting to say, just track when I need this labor and tell me if I'm ever short. If I set it to constraint, it's just going to, not schedule work when I don't have this labor. And the way this is set up, by the way, is it's just a standard Business Central shop calendar. The difference is now I specify how many people I have available at different times throughout the day. So for welding labor, Monday to Friday on shift 1, so up until 4 p.m., I have 2 people. After that, I only have 1 person. And that's what you saw on the schedule. At 4 o'clock, I could only schedule 1 production order that needed that welding labor. All right. So that's the basic setup of it. Again, if you want to try it out, get a hold of Sabre. They'll help you out. But you can install it off AppSource, run the setup wizard. Once you've installed it, that's the key, right? After it's installed, you run the MX APS setup wizard, right? So this guy here, MX APS setup wizard, run that, walk your way through it. It'll set you up, it generate production schedule, and there's a very high likelihood you will get a schedule that you can actually use, assuming your routings are in good shape. If your routings aren't in good shape, you're going to have to clean those up before you can get a realistic schedule. All right, so that's basically it on MX that I wanted to sort of go through on the demo. Let's jump in and just talk about a couple of other things. And by the way, if you do have any questions, feel free to enter them in the Q&A box within the meeting there, and we'll cover them off at the end. But all of this blabbing I've been doing and talking about, what it can do, well, what does it get you if you do all of that? And these are some real examples of what people have accomplished, right? And really where you're going to see is just better efficiency overall across the board. Everything's going to be more efficient, right? Because now we've got a schedule we can work towards. We're not doing that local optimization and building WIP that doesn't tie into the work that somebody's doing downstream or any of that kind of stuff, right? You're just going to get more throughput. You know exactly how you're going to work in the shop every day. And that's going to result in lower labor, of course, lower direct labor costs, everything else, way less WIP, all of those sorts of things is what we're going to do. We actually had one customer in automotive that was able to go to, automotive is big on just-in-time scheduling. They're able to eliminate, like 80% of their inventory, their component inventory, because they actually started scheduling their loading dock with MX as well. So they tie in receipt of their components with their production schedule. So the trucks arrived an hour before the production order was supposed to start, gave them time to move the components in, and away they went. So there's tons of stuff you can do using MX, or tons of improvements that you get out of something that you think of as just scheduling, right? Everything from HR, labor costs, WIP, inventory carrying costs, all sorts of stuff just by having a good schedule. All right. Now, if you do, I guess I got to talk about the cost. So it's basically a cost that you can't afford not to get, right? Like you can start it, talk to Sabre. They'll be able to give you specific pricing for your environment. But the way it's priced is based on the number of production orders you schedule at any given time. So if I've got 50 production orders going on a weekly basis, you get the license that covers up to 50 production orders. And I think the levels are up to 75, then up to 200, then up to 500 or something like that. The cheapest solution is less than a couple $100 a month, right? And for a lot of organizations, that's enough. If you're scheduling 75 production orders or less at one time, and you might run 1,000 production orders a month, but if you schedule 75 at a time, it's going to cost you less than a couple $100 to get everything that I showed you today. And there's no way that that costs you less than paying somebody to manage that schedule manually, right? It'll pay for itself the first day, the first week that you use the thing. All right. Anyway, talk to Sabre. They'll be able to help you out with pricing on that. But again, it's based on the number of production orders you're scheduling at any given time. So if you do want more information, you can go to MxAPS.com. That takes you to the InsightWorks website. It gives you a lot of information, lots of videos and things like that on there. Or contact your rep at Sabre. They're very knowledgeable on the manufacturing side. They'll be able to help you out with scheduling questions, MX APS questions, and pricing. And yeah, that's basically it. So, Robbie, that's all I had to cover today. I'm not sure if you got any questions out of that.
So, yeah, thank you for that presentation, Mark. It was very insightful. So now I'll allow you all to unmute yourselves to ask Mark your questions. Mark, first, Hans did ask a question in the Q&A, which is, when is a good time to implement your tool? If we are implementing BC, migrating from another ERP, is this even possible to implement while implementing Business Central?
Yes. So some of these tools, I would say normally wait. As long the key requirement is your routings are in reasonable shape, right? If you have bad routings, you need to clean those up before you get into this. But assuming those are in good shape coming from another ERP, this is something that you could do immediately as part of that implementation. In fact, it will help you significantly. Some of the other things that we deal with, like WMS and the shop floor stuff, sometimes it's better to wait a bit until you've got your feet under you on the newer ERP. But MX APS is something that you could do sort of immediately as part of that migration, as long as your routings are in good shape.
Beautiful. Thank you for that. And so another one that came in through the Q&A is, how is machine downtime defined and configured to be included in capacity constraints?
The way you do that is standard Business Central capability called the absence. So it's absence registration. You decide how much you want to knock down the capacity of the machine, and MX will take that into account and schedule around that downtime. And incidentally, we can also do preventative maintenance scheduling through MX as well. And the cool thing about that is you can have a floating PM schedule. So instead of saying, hey, Tuesday morning at 8 a.m., we're shutting this machine down, we can say, hey, within the next few days, we need to do some maintenance. And MX will pick the best time, the least disruptive time to production, to take that machine down to do that maintenance. So we can do maintenance scheduling as well in MX. Anyway, yeah. Hopefully that answered the question.
Yes. And the final one is, do machines need to be specified in the routing, or can the scheduler choose among multiple machines based on requirements?
Yeah, so as I was showing you there, you can do one or the other. You can specify the machine, like that preferred 10-foot press brake, or you can just say, hey, choose one of the machines in the laser cutter work center. Now, maybe that question also meant that, what if I don't have any machines defined? That's also possible. Now, we want you to actually have machines under the work center. If you've, say, got a work center defined with a capacity of 5 and no machine centers, we'll still schedule it, but we'll create sort of in the results, a dummy machine center that all that work is scheduled on. So it's a good point, because back to the routings, ideally, you don't want one work center with a capacity of 5 defined in Business Central. You want one work center with 5 machine centers underneath it. That's how MX is going to work best. That's how it's going to, manage the capacity and everything for you.
Fantastic. So if that's all the questions for today, we'd like to thank you for attending the webinar. And I'd also like to thank Mark for presenting for us today. And with that, I hope you all have a great day, and we hope to see you again soon at one of our upcoming webinars.